as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know.
Oh, well. Love him or hate him. It was a good quote from the late Donald Rumsfeld. At the time he was the Secretary of Defense. It was definitely an interesting time. A time with many unknown unknowns, I suppose. Certainly only more true, even though that quote is often mocked or made fun of, possibly considering the source. There's a modicum of truth to that statement that he made. Today's world, we are pelted by all manner of news and opinion and analysis, and often they are conflated and mixed in with native advertising and opinions shared by your social media friends, some of whom you may not even know. So the topic today is part of the overarching news topic. We've covered this a little bit previously. But today is more about just good information, which we can define good to mean crazy things like correct, factual, provable, accurate, precise, or even something close to precise. Precision and accuracy, that's a throwback to some college days. So what do we do with all this information flying at us? And that's the question for today. We have infinite connectivity, comparatively speaking, and infinite resources to connect to, and we have various, not infinite, luckily, but various ways to connect to people and share and reshare and discover and consume information and then produce it. Anyone with a microphone or a camera or both can become their own news station or editorial or magazine or whatever. You can blog, you can speak, you can write, that's blogging. You can, anything is blogging. What is it? Anybody can do anything anymore. So let's start with an interesting passage from a Malcolm Gladwell book, actually from an article he wrote in the New Yorker, but I don't know that the article is still to be found. I've posted a link to a Boing Boing article. Pardon me while I sip some tea. A Boing Boing article in the notes about talking to strangers, wherein Malcolm Gladwell, I may have said McDowell, but I keep doing that in my mind. Malcolm Gladwell discusses the difference between a puzzle and a mystery. So a puzzle is supposed to become easier or solvable or approach a solution when you get more information. And you could directly illustrate this by, jigsaw puzzle example. Every time you add a piece to the puzzle in the correct place, you get one piece closer to being done, and the image on the puzzle becomes more apparent, and eventually puzzle solved. And then you move on to the next one. A mystery, on the other hand, in this context, is not necessarily solved with more information. It's a matter of analysis and comprehension of the data flying at you. And that's the conundrum that could be improved, in my opinion. And if you have an opinion, certainly come on down and we can talk for hours. I'm sure there's many more hours than that to talk about this overarching problem, which is not just news, not just how we are informed, but also what we do with it and how we sort of assemble our own understanding of the mystery that news is trying to solve. So today we have this podcast is produced in the city of Las Vegas, Nevada, which is presently, as of July 19th, still, well, I think it's been since July 5th, the number one hotspot in the United States concerning new test positivity and hospitalizations for our pandemic, SARS-CoV-2 virus, and the resulting COVID-19 collection of illnesses. Excuse me. And I am based in Las Vegas, and I will literally hear directly from people I know in this city that they do not believe the need for vaccination. They think the need for masks is dumb. They just want to get back to work. They want crowds and crowds of people to be to be wandering the streets on the Strip and the downtown area and Summerlin. Pardon me. And they want to return to normal, even though there's nothing that indicates that we're on the precipice of normalcy. Right? So the news should be, if this were a puzzle, should be tracking the science and the facts and the numbers, discoveries concerning transmission from January 2020, when this was becoming apparent. How do you get it? Do fomites transmit the disease? Do masks work? All that. And we've had, 15, 16, 18 months, depending on which place you're in and when they decided to introduce whichever mandates and whatnot. So there should be a certain amount of clarity now if this were indeed a puzzle. But in fact, it is a mystery if we go with Gladwell's descriptions. So what we have is more information all the time, moving in every direction possible. Various media outlets are pro or anti-vaccination. They are quoting various people who maybe shouldn't be quoted. Do doctors know what they're talking about? Possibly. Do epidemiologists spend their entire academic and professional careers analyzing this stuff? Yeah. Do doctors spend their time taking care of individual patients in a locality? Yeah. Are those different things? Yeah. So how do we get correct, useful, or as I've said in the title of today's episode, good information into the hands or the hearts and minds, if you will, of the population on the globe so that people can make better decisions? That's the question. So we have, I don't remember what the numbers are. I'm sure somebody can look this up, so I will leave it to the reader or the listener. By the way, we do have show notes that are published on Substack. So links, relevant links, often found there, so you can read, or you, of course, can listen to this podcast, which you should. You can even come on and have a discussion about various topics, which you also should. So various people on the planet have mobile devices, always connected, apparently always spying on them. That's another topic for another day. So you always have access to answers. I myself have said before, there's really no reason to have arguments in pubs, for example. Some more tea. You can hear my voice. So allergies as always. So there's really no reason to argue over a sports score or a quote or a movie title or much else, because someone will be able to pull up that fact and puzzle solved, right? Now, certainly nobody will argue over who starred in a particular movie, and you pull it up and you say, oh, it was George Clooney. And then someone else might say, no, it wasn't. That doesn't really work. Yet, we find ourselves going back to the pandemic example just because it's applies globally at this point. You can literally have people arguing over scientific facts that they have no basis to form an argument for or against other than what they've heard, right? You, and certainly me, and people we know are probably, statistically, are not working in a laboratory. They're not epidemiologists, virologists, immunologists, right? They're normal people. Maybe they spent a lot of 2020 staying home. Maybe they have kids that were schooling from home, learning from home, working from home. All these challenges that people have faced, they barely made it through that. We have eviction moratoriums coming to an end. We have attempts at rebuilding the economy, and so on. The list goes on, right? The distractions. Daniel Schmachtenberg, very smart, very, very smart man, has gone on at length. I'll try to dig up one of the videos that he's done. He'll talk about how the casual person does not have the bandwidth to comprehend the political game playing that goes on just during election times, or the functioning of our various levels of government. It's just too much to keep track of, unless that is your profession to track that. If you're in the news media or whatever, or maybe you're just got a lot of free time. But when you have to trust news sources or analysts or your friends, and that's where social media has really taken off, right? So when you have to trust these people, you can construct your own image, fill in the picture, the big picture, perhaps, and then try to assess what you have before you. And then the problem becomes, well, which pieces of information, which pixels, or really which puzzle pieces are fitting together in the correct places. There's a person named Jeff Jonas who presently has a startup called Sensing. Does entity resolution. That's another. It's actually an interesting topic, but he was back in the day when MIT students were coming to Las Vegas to play team card counting, blackjack, I think in the movie 21. This is chronicled. And so Jeff's company, before IBM acquired him and them, Jeff's company was brought in as a consulting group to try to figure out who was cheating the casinos. So, very interesting character. So, he used to live in Las Vegas. He has since moved away, but very interesting character. He has a good story about bringing, I think it was 3, but multiple puzzles to a friend's home as a barbecue or some sort of a gathering. So he brings the puzzles, but what he did was he mixed the pieces together so that any one puzzle had pieces from the other 2 or whatever, 2, 3, 1, whatever it was. And then he just sort of watched as people tried to figure out, like, where does this piece go? Wait, why is this not here? That kind of thing. And they were very confused as it became apparent that the pieces were not matching, right? Jigsaws they follow a pretty much standard pattern if you buy a normal bulk produced jigsaw puzzle. So the piece might physically fit, but the image on the piece does not, right? So you're assembling pieces that fit, and then you don't have a sane, rational image. So that doesn't make sense. So what happens when people who do not have time, who do not know that the pieces in each puzzle box have been intermingled, try to make sense of what they are presented with when pieces of the puzzle fly at them, whether it's the local news, national news, your social media feeds, a friend, somebody said, I heard. Are you vaccinated? Do you have concerns? Are your concerns based on science and perhaps you have allergies, or maybe your medical history suggests that you should be extra cautious? Or is it something you read? Something somebody said in a podcast? Hopefully not this one. So when people assemble a picture for their own comprehension, all this data is, well, literally data. So who turns it into information? If we can harken back to Claude Shannon, right? Information theory, there's data and there's information. If we strip away the repetitive, the unnecessary, the redundant bits of data, you end up with information. And so how is the casual person expected to distill the various streams of incoming data into information that they will comprehend and that is actionable, so that they can make decisions on their comprehension of this information? And that is the overarching, it goes back to the news part of this arc, and that is how are normal people to deal with all these bits. And then what, I'm a software developer. You may do something in a related field, or maybe you're just listening in. Maybe you're on a treadmill right now and you have to get back to work later and you have nothing to do with technology. Can't say. But either way, the people that are consuming the news are really the ones that need to drive this. People like myself who can write software, well, I have my notion. I've actually, I think in the news episode of the FFS Talk podcast, I was suggesting something like messaging as we do between microservices, which is a hot topic for the last several years. Scaling big systems. Netflix is a very common one. They've done a lot of presentations in this field. But how do you become as big as Netflix and yet as responsive to any individual customer as a small, well, I guess in the case of Netflix, as a small videotape store, right? You should be able to go to the Netflix website or the application on your smart TV, and it should just work as if you are going to rent a movie, like magic. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. Well, certainly the ridiculously complicated diversity that is the data flow to each individual person, whether you've whether you've unplugged, I guess, from social media or not, you still are deluged with all manner of news feeds, emails, just checking your mailbox if you still get paper mail, and then forget about it if you have to take care of, if you have kids, if you have elder parents or relatives or friends, if you have to look after anyone other than yourself. It seems to almost go up exponentially. The amount of detail to manage. And so so what works right now is we have this infrastructure in place to deliver bits. We deliver too many bits, I would argue. And nothing is working with the consumer to turn that into an information picture that they can work with. So, for example, if you are a caretaker, right, you're looking after a family member or friend, maybe that's your job, as in your profession, or maybe it's just part of life now. You experience the medical system, you experience the medical billing system, you experience the logistical challenges of moving a person who may have limitations or may have vulnerabilities if they are immunocompromised in the pandemic world, right? You don't want to move them amongst crowds of people, entering hospitals or other similar facilities may be high risk. So there's there's the real responsibility, and then there's the data that's flying at you. So how do you manage all that data when that is not your, well, if it is your profession, maybe you can manage it. But if you're not used to that, if that's new to you, or if it is your profession, if you have multiple clients or multiple patients that you're working with, you now have multiple varied, diverse information streams, just keeping track of things like transportation, equipment, medications, vital signs, health measurements, right? If you're not doing lab reports, if you're not drawing blood, maybe you're just looking for indicators. Maybe you're taking body temperatures and exercise, physical therapy. There's all sorts of things that you don't really think about until you have to think about them. And then how do you construct that picture? So whether it's the health of your self and your immediate surroundings, the people nearest you that you may encounter for the purposes of the pandemic, 6 to 30 feet, I think is what they've talked about. And I'm not even sure, right? I'm giving you a piece of data. The actual information may be completely uncertain at this time. 6 foot social distancing has been the norm. Is it the minimum? Is it is that where your likelihood of becoming infected drops off by half? Who knows? But constructing this image in which to make decisions, that's the challenge. So the tools are what I would argue, need to be improved given the infrastructure we have. So the caretaker has access to billing systems and record keeping, and you can, in some cases, you can see a particular patient's medical history. There's some hospitals have instituted a patient portal for sharing information, HIPAA compliant, one would hope. So you can go and you can check and see what the labs were, what the patient weight was when they were last checked. You can, all sorts of diagnoses and prognoses and records and tests and all sorts of things. Making sense of that is something that is sometimes left to chance. Same with pandemics. Do you believe Dr. Fauci? Do you believe Tucker Carlson? Do you believe Rand Paul? Do you believe Joe Rogan? And the list goes on. The origin of the virus is interesting. Does it cloud the picture you're trying to form about your own personal safety and the safety of those around you? Possibly. The cause is something that is important. But whether the virus came from here or there doesn't affect the fact that I would like to avoid not only getting it, but also transmitting it. I myself was vaccinated. I received my second booster shot, or my second shot, which was the booster shot from Moderna in February of 2021. I didn't even give it a second thought. There are all manner of conspiracy theories about illness to death to embedded circuitry to track people to, I'm sure the list goes on. So the conspiracy theorists are winning. Allegedly, I want to say it was about 20% of unvaccinated people are concerned that they will be tracked by microchips in the vaccine. So there are people that are making that decision based on information as they have distilled it from data that has been flying at them from who knows where. There is very, very rarely is there a lineage to the bits, the pixels that we use to form this picture on which we base these very important decisions. So we just have this pile of data, bits and bits and bits. And here we are. So my argument, and again, if you are interested in this particular topic, the sound of one hand clapping is a podcast with one person speaking. It's not nearly as interesting. The applause are deafening. But if you have some thoughts on this topic, I would be more than thrilled to discuss and share with the other person listening. So my proposal is a sort of a we have to look at how things that people consume with attention garner that attention, and then a view. You can't really present pandemic data as you would data for The Bachelorette or America's Got Talent. Although I think Saturday Night Live did a bit on that. I think Fauci was the host of a game show or something, and so those are comical. But what keeps people engaged? If anyone is a soap opera fan from back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, probably today, I remember when I was growing up, All My Children and General Hospital were the two favorites. So what keeps people who do consume those things, what keeps them engaged? And you have to, I suppose, foment curiosity and then feed it. So how do we make people curious about things like personal health, personal well-being, the health and well-being of family and friends, the impact that one person has on their surroundings? You know, if you've ever thrown a burning thing, a match, maybe a cigarette if you smoke, if you've ever thrown it somewhere without regard to where it's landing, maybe you've thrown it out the window of a car and the wind mysteriously and magically draws the cigarette butt, for example, into an open window of your own car or a car behind you if you're traveling. If you'd never considered that possibility, you may just do it. Maybe you throw a burning match into a garbage can and you don't know that there are paper and perhaps some accelerants in there. Who knows? Who knows what's in there? Maybe somebody threw away some a flammable liquid without thinking. And so if you don't have some sort of feedback loop, and unfortunately viruses such as the SARS-CoV-2 that have a multiple day incubation period make this difficult, but people do understand generally how illness is transmitted. So if we continue with the illness scenario, so how do we connect the infrastructure we have in our pockets with the data which changes over time, with the facts, with the scientific understanding which hopefully evolves over time, which unfortunately appears to change over time, as in could go left, could go right, and I mean politically or otherwise. So how do we make sense of that for the casual person who, just like checking the weather, you know, not everybody's a meteorologist, but you understand that if the weather map says it's going to be hot outside and with wind or a chance of rain, those things are immediately apparent because when you go outside, those are true. And here's the interesting part. When they are not true, people are willing to let that slide. So occasionally, the weather is wrong. The weather reporting, the forecast, the person on TV, the person on the radio, the person on your smart speaker, they give you an incorrect, either partially or completely incorrect forecast. And to this day, there are probably arguments to be made that it could go longer than 4 to 5 days, but a weather forecast 4 to 5 days out is pretty much pushing the limit. After that, you're taking a good guess, maybe on statistical, year over year. But people, the general consumer of weather data, weather reporting, the data is generally available. You can look up the here in Las Vegas. Going back to Vegas, we've had record-breaking temperatures. I think we had 117 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a record for that particular day. I think the day before or the day of in Death Valley, it was 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So not really that hot. But historical data goes back to, say 100 years ago. So anyone, if they were curious, could go and look at the data, or they can accept the information that's presented, that today will be hot, today was hot, today was the hottest, and they take it at face value. So the question then, why are some facts as presented, especially if they evolve over time and they have some error, why are they discounted so quickly out of hand when the consequences are so much more dire than merely whether it's going to be 115, 117, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, whether you should bring an umbrella or sunscreen, etc. Right? So the impact apparently is financial and political. If a particular, and we don't even have to stick with the pandemic, but any story we are told could be global political strife as it impacts wherever you are, right? Maybe there were bombings, explosions, injuries, deaths. Maybe it's just financial impact. Maybe it's maybe damage, vandalism has an impact on quality of life, on local business, on the local economy. So it's really the second order effects. The weather, I'm kind of thinking about this right now, so this is not scripted. So the weather being incorrect is very often fine. The exact temperature, whether it rains or not, getting a hurricane track correct has some actual consequences. What are those consequences? Do we evacuate? Do we prepare to lock down, so to speak? And maybe you're going to be stuck at home in a storm. What do they call it? A storm basement for a day, 2 days, whatever. Maybe there'll be flooding. Maybe they have to move. Maybe FEMA has to do their thing. That doesn't go well every time. But so really, it's not the first order effects of correct information, whether the puzzle or the mystery is evolving in a useful or unuseful direction. The first order, not quite as interesting, perhaps, compared to the second order effects, which are economic, political, which are then eventually economic, and probably general quality of life, health, wellness, a general comfort level. So how is that picture to be formed? And so I keep asking that question because that is the question. We have the Quest commercials from probably the early 2000s. You can look on YouTube for Quest, Qwest. And I think there's a supercut of all the commercials together. And it was somebody would walk into a hotel and say, do you have a particular movie? And the front desk person says, we have every movie ever made in every language. And he says, how is that possible? It's because of Quest, because of the internet, because of, I think they had fiber, early days of fiber. So we have this infinite access. So how do we distill that down to a way where people understand not only the primary impact, the weather, for example, and then the secondary impact, does heavy rain mean flooding, mean I can't go to work? Does heavy rain mean flooding means it will run into my home and destroy my property? Does it mean it will place people in danger? Does it mean I have to be concerned about my own safety, my own financial security, right? So it's the second order effects, which are, I believe, left to chance, but which have far more impact than the primary facts, and which become fodder for political argument to drive the discussion away from the primary cause of the secondary, and to finger pointing blame of the secondary, that is the financial or health, well-being, on like a political opponent. So interesting. So really it's a question of and this goes back to, like I said, pardon me. I apologize for my voice. It's getting worse and worse. I'll try to dig up that Daniel Schmachtenberg. I think it was a discussion, possibly with Eric Weinstein, about people who just don't have the bandwidth to understand the political landscape of government. And so if people are trying to do their thing, especially if you're a restaurant owner, service industry, all these hard-hit economic facets over the last 18 months, you're worried about that. You're not worried about who said what about which vaccine at which point in time. And because news is reported as anecdotes, as a collection of quotes and points, as in they're trying to make a point, maybe not so much educate as to garner attention, clicks, shares, likes, right? So you have to make an interesting story, almost like reporting on sports, right? In Las Vegas, when the numbers of test positivity and hospitalizations were on the decline, words like dropping, continue to fall, these were the headlines. But when it's rising, breaking through 5 and 10% and continuing to rise, the language is a little bit more subdued. Maybe it's placed below the fold, if there is a fold on internet news websites. So how it's reported has an impact on how those pixels are inserted into our picture of comprehension. But I think the tools that could be developed would account for the factual components. And I touched on this with the news specifically. But to be able to, not everyone's going to read a Wikipedia article, whether you like Wikipedia as a primary or secondary, or I usually use Wikipedia as a starting point. But do people ever look at the change history of a Wikipedia page? So what if you could look at a change history of statements from, well, pick on Fauci again. What if you could look at Fauci's, not YouTube quotes, although you could back it with that, but what if you could actually distill what he's saying in various hearings and on various podcasts and news shows and press conferences, put them on a timeline, and then associate what he is saying with the supporting information from CDC, from WHO, from NIH, from other, global and possibly even local, right? Maybe your state health department, your county or city health department has extra data if you were in New York at the time, or today here in Nevada. Maybe the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services has some thoughts, right? So how does this total information awareness, which was a term used, I think, in the 90s for a military or military intelligence or general, maybe it was after 2000. No, I think it was in the context of the Patriot Act. So a little bit more sinister perhaps, but TIA, total information awareness. Can we draw a picture, an infographic perhaps, that illustrates the state of affairs at any given time, rather than clickbait headlines and long TLDR articles? Can we, and I'm saying we as in people who build systems and software and user-facing tools and apps, can we create a system that constructs that picture that I keep going back to? Infographics are very popular. So is it possible to construct a visual representation? And this would have to be made accessible for vision impaired, so bear with me. Is it possible, though, to create this image? Maybe it's not even a picture. Maybe it's just the data, or the information in this case, that could be turned into a visualization. Or maybe it's left to the consumer. So John Hopkins, I'm bouncing around here a little bit, but we're thinking live. I'm having a conversation with myself, and it's possible that I'm the only listener as well, but well, fingers crossed. So Johns Hopkins was publishing and continues to publish I think it's been called the World Sick Map. So they collect data. I think they are putting it on GitHub. So they're making the raw data available. And then they're doing whatever ETL to put it into their visualization tools, which have evolved over time. They're using ArcGIS and some maps and some data points, and it has maybe improved. That's another topic for another day also. But the fact is, they were presenting a visualization of data that anyone could build similar tools with, and many people did. So many people were taking a stab at a visualization, a way to present their take, their view, literally a view on the data as it was available. And I would wonder if that shouldn't be sort of the de facto, like anytime you have a news article that is based on quotations or data, statistics, reported information, distilled and analyzed. You have a collection of different facets that create a particular report, an article, a news segment. Oftentimes those are opaque in that you don't get to see the reporter's notebook. You don't see the segment producer's clip list. You don't see, to the extent that they are being shared, the list of sources, right? Clearly you can't violate confidentiality with a source that is remaining anonymous. But to be very explicit about facts, not from an informed source who wishes to remain anonymous, those are often obfuscated so that this has been a topic for a general analysis of our news system. Occasionally, a dubious source can become more credible by being anonymous if they are quoted by credible publications. And then if that publication is quoted in another publication, the dubious source becomes credible through osmosis, I suppose. So assigned trust, a casual person who wouldn't know whether to trust a particular source of information or not, that data, that opinion, that fact, that information appears in an article in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the New York Post, your local paper, and then that gets quoted again, or it appears on your favorite left or right-leaning YouTube channel or podcast. And because it was in the Times, the fact that the source was anonymous and dubious, possibly repeated, maybe the Times got the quote from the Post or the Gazette, or pick a stream of newspapers of reputable publications. So the credibility, like the telephone game, grows. So without knowing the genealogy, if you will, of a particular piece of information, it becomes credible through like a virus. And without knowing the source of the virus, you really can't decide whether you believe it or not. So you have to look at where you got it from, not where it came from. Kind of makes you think. So the question is, and I will get back to this again and again, I think, because this has always been fascinating to me. By the way, I think I mentioned this again in the news episode of the FFS Talk podcast. I did submit a project to Y Combinator for news. They had a fake news tracked. So they said, submit your project ideas. Maybe you'll get into the cohort, which we did not. But the idea was to track facts. That's hard to say. Facts, right? One fact, two facts. FACTS. So if you have multiple facts, being able to keep track of where they came from and how they intersect, how they fit together, how they do not, how correcting one fact may lead to the need to correct multiple facts. So I think there's a lot left on the table when it comes to the tools. We can create games. We can create Bitcoin trading applications. We can create, what else is there? Dating apps. We can create apps all day. But when it comes to news, it seems that people are stuck in the mode of writing stories and getting clicks. And we are not, in my opinion, and yours may differ, and you are welcome to discuss. We are stuck in the world of clicks, and I'll even use the word sensationalism, getting attention, getting the traffic, making the revenue, and maybe informing the public with information, which can be referred back to and audited. And maybe, like I was saying earlier, maybe someone wants to take the facts as they are reported, the pieces of data, the tidbits of information, the quotes, the locations, the timestamps, and maybe create a timeline or a map or some other visualization. If that can be constructed from data that you can look at yourself, then it's not a matter of a political cartoon. It's literally a visualization of a set of in this case we'll say data points, but information that has been captured and correlated, if you will, maybe even classified, so that you can determine, or someone could determine, the relations, the impact, the accuracy, the precision. So yes, if there is a infrastructure in place to share these pieces of data, the information, and so on, and those with the wherewithal can construct visualizations and other education tools so that you're not merely sharing a sensational headline and a picture, which, by the way, sorry to say this, 80% of your friends or social media buddies are not reading past that. It's the way it is. People are doing book reports by reading the title and the back cover, or maybe the forward. They're not reading the book. They're not even reading the Cliff Notes. They're reading somebody else's review of the Cliff Notes. So when people go by the headline and the picture and the description, the deck, they are not consuming the facts in the case, the details of the story, the actual data of the weather report. They're looking at the top and they're moving on, or they're resharing it, which is even worse. I will close, because we're coming up on an hour and my voice, as you can hear, is not cooperating. But I will close with the notion. Well, first, before I do that, I will remind you that we do have the show notes on Substack. And I always forget. I have a couple of podcasts, by the way. So I occasionally confuse. The Substack and the review and the Anchor. All right. So ffstalk.substack.com. The reason I had to look that up is because I think it's the review. I should know all this off the top of my head, but like I said, I have 3 podcasts. ffstalk.com is our Twitter handle, which I think is also our review profile for the weekend edition, where I just write some stuff. It's not for a particular episode. And then our Anchor account, where the podcast is currently distributed, FFS Talk. So these are items that will be in the show notes. The show notes link to the Anchor point of distribution. We will eventually, this was the content of the meta episode from the week prior. We will have better tools, which I've sort of been alluding to here, just for keeping track of topic arcs, which it's hard to do with an email newsletter and Anchor.fm RSS feeds. So better ways to interact and engage. So we'll have a website, at the very least, to distribute from a single point of origin. So on that note, I was going to get to the website part. So we're going to, as kind of an experiment, I suppose, try to get the various topics that we're talking about here into some structure that's easier to add to than blog comments. And this will be part of an I keep using the overarching and topic arcs, but there is an actual project, which I mentioned earlier, that was rejected by Y Combinator. And I don't even know if anything came of that. I've never heard of any ongoing. I can't remember if that was. I'll have to look that up. That's for another time. But the project in question, I would like to pursue in the context of, and I'll give another example of when your friends, or your social media friends anyway, share and reshare. Have you ever seen someone share a missing child post on Facebook, for example? So they say, please share, please reshare. And it's a picture or 2 pictures, missing child. And if there are comments, it will usually be some emoji about sad, or it'll be shared 50 times. All these people being helpful. If you click on the article on the shared item, you will often find that the child went missing 6 months, a year, 5 years ago. And I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing at the fact that people are sharing things blind without reading them. And the child was found, sometimes safely, sometimes not. Clearly, that outcome is a separate issue, which way it went. But the fact is, people are sharing without reading. Missing children are an extreme case, very personal, but this happens every day with everything. And so the genealogy, like I said, that the history, the lineage of a particular story, a particular set of facts, a particular collection of data and information and quotes and so on. Where did they come from? Are they correct? Have they been updated? Have they been shown to be true or false? Steele dossier, anyone? Russiagate? Yeah, we have the tools. We have the technology. We can rebuild him for more than $6 million. Anyway, that's where I will leave it today. Again, show notes, ffstalk.substack.com. Listen on Anchor. If you're listening to the show now, you probably have found that. And I will ask you to read the show notes. In there's some links I've mentioned. Hopefully I'll have one for Daniel Schmachtenberg discussing the complexities of the world. And I have the quote from Gladwell and some stuff about the current state of affairs of the pandemic here in Las Vegas. So I have my box of masks right here. I'm gonna have my own mitigation efforts, and we'll see what happens. And I hope you have been staying safe out there. And I thank you for listening. Tell your friends. Be sure and share, like, subscribe, all that. You can follow me on my buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo profile, which has links to other podcasts and newsletters and projects. You are not obligated to buy any coffee, but if you do, I will buy coffee. I have already purchased some Robusta beans. I had not tried a Robusta, pure, straight Robusta coffee beans. I know a lot of old school American coffee was a lot of Robusta. But so that was delicious. No obligation, but I do use that as an out-of-band link hub of sorts. And we'll go from there. And FFStalk.com on Twitter. And I look forward to you being a guest on this show. Let's talk about what you want to talk about. Thank you for listening.